Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Hokyoji Sunday Dharma Talk. My name is Myo-on, for those who don't know me. I think most of you do. And I'm on the staff at Hokyoji. This morning, I'm really happy to introduce our dear friend and executive director of Hokyoji, Hartman Carl Holtman. Carl was an infantry leader in Viet Nam and in the late 1980s came to the Dharma through the writings of Thich Nhat Hanh. He was a board member for 5 years at the Clouds and Water Zen Center, and in 2010, after retiring from the Postal Service, he moved to Hokyoji with his wife, Susan Ekyo Nelson. After a few years, he became Hokyoji's executive director and now splits his time between Hokyoji and Minneapolis. When in Minneapolis, he thoroughly enjoys spending time with his two granddaughters. Today's talk is titled Lost in Translation. Take it away, Hartman.
Well, good morning to you all, and see how this goes. The title of my talk, it was 2 months ago when I had very vague ideas about what I would possibly talk about, and they asked for a title, and I don't know. All right, Lost in Translation. So we'll see how we can connect this up. As Myo-on said in the intro, in the late 80s, I chanced upon the writings of Thich Nhat Hanh. And he became my go-to guy for the study of and practice of the Dharma. And I started out reading his books. So what was the first one? Being Peace. That's the book I first saw of his, stuck on a shelf in the library, and I was kind of intrigued by the title and that it was written by a Vietnamese person. I pulled it out, and I really connected with what he was saying in that book. And I found some others. You know, he had The Miracle of Mindfulness, which was another real earlier book. But back at that time, he was also writing Sutra Commentaries. And the first one I came across was a small volume on the Heart Sutra, which gave me a basic understanding of emptiness, which from the Mahayana stuff, I didn't really understand what they were talking about. Anyway, and then he had the Four Foundations of Mindfulness. He had the Full Awareness of Breathing Sutra. He had one called The Better Way to Live Alone. Another one called The Better Way to Catch a Snake. And he did a couple of Mahayana sutras. The only one I read was a really little short booklet called The 8 Realizations of the Great Beings. It was a very early Mahayana sutra from like 100 current era, written in Chinese. But so far, it's my favorite Mahayana sutra. Anyway, those were all published by a little publisher in Berkeley, the Parallax Press, that was publishing all of his stuff at that time. Since then, his sutra commentaries have gotten compiled into a single volume, and it's called Awakening of the Heart. And there's 10 commentaries in there. 3 of them are Mahayana, and the others are early ones from the Pali Canon or maybe the Chinese canon. anyway, as I started looking into more of this stuff, he did 10 sutras. I came on to another one by a scholar named Glenn Wallace, and he picked 16 out in his book, The Basic Teachings of the Buddha. And I want to read a couple paragraphs here from Glenn Wallace's introduction. And he's just saying that the Pali Canon, there's 5,434 texts classified as teaching discourses or suttas. And then there's 15 book-length works classified as short works, or the Kudaka, ranging between maybe 9 and 500 pages. So that's the Pali Canon, over 5,000. The Chinese canon has 151 texts from the sutras, 612 Mahayana works, 572 Vajrayana works. A Tibetan canon's got 270 sutra sections in 30 oversized format volumes, 33 additional volumes of Mahayana sutras, 300 tantras in 30 volumes. And what he says is that they include much more than just the teachings of the Buddha. They've got monastic regulations, philosophical works, all kinds of things get stuck in there. But he said here, tedious text critical examinations of these canons by scholars yield a significant fact. Through centuries of transmission, different canonical versions of the same text rarely reveal any but the most inconsequential differences. These differences mainly involve minor alterations in style, organization, and orthography. And the reason I want to mention all of that is that there is some skepticism about early Buddhist teachings. There are some scholars that are skeptical about the existence of the Buddha. And Buddhism is different from other major, what they call book religions. Christianity has a book, Judaism has a book, the Muslims have their book. I think even the Hindus have their texts. But, the Buddha, he taught for, 40 years, and his stuff is quite diverse. Anyway, so getting back to translations, we have all of these texts that have to be translated. And the first Western translators were British government officials in Sri Lanka. And they mostly had law backgrounds and were Christians. And so when they started translating the Pali works there, the terms that they chose reflected their backgrounds. And it was, that language sometimes kind of obscured what the teachings were going for. So how does that relate to lost in translation? Well, there are terms that are difficult to translate or have been translated in ways that aren't completely clear or sometimes just inaccurate. And the one example I'm going to use today is the term Anata. So Anata, or not self, is one of the three signs of existence, along with impermanence and unsatisfactoriness, or dukkha. Everything is transient. Everything seems to have a quality of unsatisfactoriness embedded in it, or at least our perceptions of it have that. And the one that claims not self, or anatta. And unfortunately, anatta often gets mistranslated. How many here have heard a Buddhist teaching that there is no self? Yeah, okay, right. We've all run across that, but no self is actually a mistranslation of anatta. And so, where are we here? It's made up of two parts. The first part, an, means not or without, and then the atta, atta, or what you might be more familiar with is Atman, the Vedic idea of a permanent self. And so the correct translation would be not self and not no self. The Buddha never taught, there is nowhere that you can find the Buddha teaching that there is no self. But he taught many times that you can't find yourself in this or in that. And that is the what he used the term anatta about, that his teaching was everything that we can come to know is based on the five skandhas. And there is a little sutra called the All, where the Buddha is teaching his followers, and he says, I'll tell you what the All is. It is the eye and forms, and the nose and odors, and the ears and sound, and the tongue and taste, and the body and touch. He said, everything that we know comes through those five skandhas. And we can't ever escape from those five skandhas. He's in his sutra on the smaller version of emptiness, or the lesser version of emptiness. Anyway, there's two emptiness sutras, a big one and a small one. It's the small one. He talks about the monks trying to practice meditation in the compound, and they're distracted by what's going around. So they go off into the jungle where they don't have those distractions, and they sit down. And then they're distracted by what the jungle surrounds them with. And so then they go off to some mountain cave where they have no distractions. And so then they're empty of those distractions, both from the village or the compound and the jungle. But when they have no distractions, what the Buddha says is you're empty of everything but the five skandhas. You are never empty of the five skandhas. So we are always aware of them. They're always operating, at least in the background. And so he says, if you examine these five skandhas, so you will not find your sense of self there. And where are we here? So there's a famous sutra where he's talking to a wandering guy, Vashagota. And Vashagota comes up to him and he says, how is it, Master Gotama? Is there a self? And the Buddha remains silent. And well, he's a little frustrated. He said, then how is it, Master Gotama? Is there no self? And again, the Buddha wouldn't say anything. So he got up from his seat and went away. I mean, what kind of teacher is this? He doesn't tell me anything. And the Buddha turned to his attendant, Ananda, and said, if I'd answered there is a self, this would have been siding with those who are eternalists. And if I had answered there is no self, that would have been siding with those who are nihilists. And it becomes apparent that the Buddha wasn't really concerned about what the makeup of a self was. He never denied that there was a self. He uses that term in many of his things, and well, I saw this myself, or they talk about the self, but and I don't think that anybody listening to me would deny that they have a sense of self. I mean, you know, I've been looking at my life through these same eyes and listening to it in these same ears since my first memories. And it's convenient to think that I am the same person. That same sense of self that I have now is the same self that I had when I was, a toddler, just trying to make sense of things. And yet, when you look for what might constitute that self, you can't find it. You can't find it in what you see, what you hear, what you taste. I mean, it's not there. But that doesn't mean that we don't have a self. It just means that it's not what we think it is. And what we think it is delusion. But it's convenient and it works for us. There's a philosopher who talks about our perspective on reality as being an imagined reality, that what we experience every day in our waking lives, we imagine that represents the world that we are in. It's constrained, our waking imaginings are constrained by our senses. When we're dreaming, we imagine all kinds of things and we're not constrained by our senses because we're just dreaming and we can fly or do this or other impossible things. But during our waking time, so our sense of reality is an imagining. It's a representation of all the different things we experience. But just because it's a representation, it doesn't mean that it's not real. So I'm hoping this isn't getting too confusing. So everything is without a self, without an essence, without a soul. So the Atman sometimes was translated as essence or soul. And, the Buddha saying, well, you can't find that anywhere. So whether you think of it as a sense of self or, maybe as a soul, there is nothing fixed. That's the anicca, the impermanence. We are all processes. We're not nouns. English has an abundance of nouns as compared to some other languages. We like to name things, and English enables us to put names on this, on that. And when you name something, we usually think of it as an object. But there actually aren't any objects. There are all just processes that are going on in relationship with other processes. And, I finished reading a book earlier this summer by a physicist, Carlo Rovelli, and he was trying to explain quantum theory. And somebody said, well, have you read Nagarjuna? He said, no. And people kept asking him if he had read Nagarjuna or not. And finally he did. And he latched on to Nagarjuna's argument about there not being anything that has an essence. Nothing that exists has an essence. Everything is changing. And what Rovelli said in his book was that nothing exists until it's in relationship with something else. That phenomena do not exist by themselves, but they need to interact with something else. They need to be in a relationship with another phenomena before they manifest. And this gets down to, what is it? The spooky action at a distance that they talk about, entanglement, quantum entanglement, and things. Anyway, so our sense of self is something that has to be in relationship with something else, and it's a process. It's like, we're 3 miles from the Mississippi River here, and where would you find the essence of the Mississippi River? You can point to it and say, that's the river, and that's the river at that moment that you point to it. But, the
You're frozen up, Carl.
Yeah. I think we just need to be patient for a moment. Okay.
Oh, you're back.
all right.
So go back a minute or so. We
You-
were
you
hearing
lost
about
me
the
for a minute?
Mississippi River.
You lost me for a minute? Is that what you
Yes,
said?
so pick up where you were talking about the Mississippi River.
The Mississippi River, yes. You can't
Okay.
point to anything and say that that is the essence of the river, because the river is made up of so many complicated things that are moving at the same time. There is nothing static out there. And so all right. So you could do the same thing with a movie film. What is the movie? The movie is the film. It's the screen. It's the audience. It's your frame of mind as you're watching the characters. And so we're all processes, but we like to think of ourselves as objects, as fixed things, just because it's convenient. It's helpful on a day-to-day basis, and it makes sense to us, but we have to understand that is not an accurate representation of what we experience, but it is a functional representation of what we experience. So this sense of self that we have, and I have a strong sense of self, but it's an illusion to think that the self that I have a sense of now is the same as it was when I was a toddler or an adolescent or something. And it's interesting that my sense of self gets stronger and stronger the more challenged I am by things. When things aren't going right, my sense of self gets stronger. I'm thinking, why is this so difficult for me? This shouldn't be that difficult. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. Why is this? Life is oftentimes non-cooperative, and I take that personally. And difficult people will bring out my sense of self very strongly because I feel challenged or threatened or upset or whatever, and my sense of self really comes out there. And they've started talking about selfing. I don't know if you've heard teachers talk about selfing, but this is the process of selfing, when you feel a little bit under the gun and your ego starts to assert itself. Then we really have a strong sense of our own self and less of a sense of others. And, over the last year or two, we've been studying the Brahma Viharas here. And when you can open your heart to others, that sense of selfing really softens, it's less about me and more about my connection to others. And, it's interesting. I was reading some of these early sutras in the Glenn Wallace book, and I think it was one of the early ones, but the Brahma Viharas are mentioned at the end, and the Buddha says to them, this is the direct path. These four qualities are the direct path to the end of dukkha. And that's a pretty strong statement, and one I can really take to heart. Let me see. I don't have too much more time here. One of the basic problems that I came across with the idea of no self, or the Vedic teachings of the Atman, and if they have an enduring self, then if they die, they're just going to get reincarnated again. And during the times of the Buddha, with the Brahmins controlling a big part of religious outlooks in that part of India, that if somebody died, it wasn't that big a deal because they were going to get reborn. And that idea, I'm sure you can see where that could lead to problems. And the idea of no self, I've read, reports of what the old Chan practitioners called the meditation disease. And this was of practitioners trying to negate their sense of self. And what happens is their personalities suffer from dissociation. And they've been studying this. And mindfulness practices with that in mind can be quite harming. So I think it's important that we understand the difference between no self and having to get rid of the self, and that the difference being that there's no fixed self. So I could ramble on here for a while longer, but I got 2 minutes. Anybody have any questions or comments? That would be helpful to me about the self. Yes, Dokai.
Yes, I was remembering, I haven't studied this for a long time, but in the Abhidharma, in Buddhist psychology, which it's pretty dry and hard to get into. However, there's one thing that I found very interesting, and it divides everything up into different lists and categories. And I think if I remember correctly, there were these 52 mental formations. And then one of them, though, was quite interesting to me. It was like a mental formation called continuity of self. It's one of the mental formations. And basically, it's just there. But it comes up under certain circumstances. It's not always there. It's like if you're washing your dishes or blah, 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 and you're just doing something that you're fully involved in, you're not kind of thinking about yourself. But as soon as you start thinking about yourself, or maybe being challenged by something, this idea of continuity, this is coming, why is this happening again, or whatever. But this thing when happens, When do I notice sometimes? Oh, I know. You're driving along a road, and just whatever's happening, going through your mind, different things. Then all of a sudden a deer pops out in front of you or something. Whoa, I said, geez, watch out. So it's like this idea of self just suddenly emerges, and it feels very strong, but it's not there all the time. So anyway, it was something that I found quite interesting. That's all I had to say.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Anyone else? Yes, Tim.
Yeah, so that one sutra you talked about where the Buddha's asked, is there a self? And he refuses to, doesn't answer, and then asks, is there no self? And he doesn't answer. Seems very straightforward. And I've heard that talked about here and there, it's not like it's a hidden passage or something. And yet the idea of no self seems, that Buddhism teaches that there isn't a self seems really dominant in some way. And wondering if you have, what are the forces that, is it just that it's, that you can't find the self? People just are, if they just translated that in their heads that there is no self, or were there, political or religious forces moving it that way? Or do you know anything about why that, the view that Buddhism has, believes there is no self is so dominant when there's this other teaching, pretty straightforward, he doesn't answer it?
Well, I do have a few thoughts on that. And one of them is that the term no self is pretty straightforward. It's simple. All right, we don't have a self. The idea of a self is just an illusion. We don't have it. That's it. It's simple. It's concise. Whereas not self is more complicated. It's more nuanced. Well, what does that mean? It doesn't mean that there is no self. It means that this isn't yourself and that isn't yourself, and it requires some investigation into things. I think that not self is just a simpler, more accessible term for people, even though it's not accurate, because the accurate teaching is more complicated and it takes more work at understanding it. Whereas no self, okay, I don't have a self. Everything I think, about that is wrong. So trying to see somewhere I've got it. Oh yeah. So there's a pretty popular book out there called What the Buddha Taught. It's by a Theravadan guy, Wapala Rahula. He was a highly respected scholar and teacher from Sri Lanka. And an excerpt from his book is, according to the teaching of the Buddha, the idea of a self is an imaginary false belief with no corresponding reality, and it produces harmful thoughts of me and mine, selfish desire, craving, attachment, hatred, ill will, conceit, pride, egoism, and other defilements, impurities, and problems. So if you think you have a self, then you're on that road to defilements, impurities, and problems. Unfortunately, he didn't use the term fixed self, no fixed self, which would make that, completely understandable. But so you get teachings like that. And I think just because it's a simpler thing, no self is not as complicated as not self. Anyway, that's the only reasoning I can come up with. But it's a good question.
Hi there.
Myo-on, yes.
So and I'm glad you just put in that other word that I was going to say, the idea of no fixed self, because if you're thinking of some continuity, there is some continuity, but if we get stuck in our ideas and our positions and conditions, that we might as well not even be alive, because there's no possible unfolding available if everything is fixed, so at the cloud session that we did our last Zazen period, we did campfire Zazen, and we read the quote from Dogen about wood and ash. And then you have the fire adds the energy to the wood, and somehow it unfolds and becomes ash, but then the ash will never be wood again. And the wood itself is not ash. And so the energy of fire, or the energy of our lives, creates something. And so we can never be little kids or young again, for those of us who are kind of getting older in our lives. So the condition of being old people is more relevant in some way than this was me when I was a baby, and so I guess the term "go with the flow" is pretty nice too. So, yeah.
Thank you.
I'd like to make kind of an observation and then a thought. I don't know enough about Buddhism, obviously, which is why I so much enjoy being a part of Hokyoji and talking to people. I learned so much. But as an American Westerner, after roughly 100 or 150 generations from the Buddha, I know that I was influenced by the idea that you're right, and some Greeks a few thousand years ago said, you can't experience the Mississippi River twice at the same time. It's constantly changing. And yet, one of the things that I have come to appreciate is the idea that there is an essence to the Mississippi River in the sense of riverness. There is that's the essence. And it comes from some work I have done over the years in phenomenology and other kinds of practices like that, which look for essence by saying, well, the Mississippi River is an example of riverness in the same way the Minnesota is, and the Missouri, and the Amazon. And the Buddha was, when you gave that example of he didn't want to come down on one side or the other, I always get the opinion he was a real smart politician, and he just knew that if he said certain things, certain people are going to believe certain things, and that's really good. But I have gotten confused in a sense by this idea that not self is something that I pick up kind of as an independent thing, like looking at a specific moment of the Mississippi River, but I also retain somewhat of the idea of humanness, of which is an essence and something that I'm a part of. So I don't even know whether there's a conflict there between my sense of Buddhism and belief in the Buddha and the principles that I know, in conflict with me being a 21st century European American kind of thing, which is lots of training and lots of indoctrination and other kinds of things. Anyway, thank you for the chance to at least say that. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Roger. And I understand what you're talking about as far as an essence of a river or riverness. And I think it depends on your definition of essence. And I think that you are using essence differently than what the Buddha was using, or what is normally found in Buddhist teachings, that in Buddhist teachings, in essence, is fixed and unchanging. Whereas it seems that your phenomenological thing about an essence could be seen as the essence is a process. That there is an essence there, but it's not a fixed thing. It's a dynamic thing. And I think that, probably the Abhidharma Dokai would have a clear answer, because they got into huge arguments about what is a conditioned thing, what is an unconditioned thing, what things are actually real and what things are representatives of it. It makes my head hurt to think about some of those things in the Abhidharma where they were trying to categorize this stuff. But I think your idea of an essence of riverness, that's a quality, and it's I think taking into account the dynamic process of rivers. Rivers are not fixed, and nothing is fixed. Everything has a dynamic quality. And as long as you recognize that, then when you use the term essence, you know what you're talking about. If you use that same term with a Buddhist teacher, they may have a different idea of what essence represents than what a phenomenological idea of essence represents. And so I think, maybe we're just, getting down into how do you define the terms. And it's important that the terms, we recognize that, this term means what we mean, but it may mean something else when somebody else uses it. And so I don't think that there is a conflict there. I mean, nobody would deny that there is an idea of riverness, that something, although you start, where does a stream become a river? Where does a creek become a stream? Well, you could dig in the weeds there, but riverness, I mean, we look at the Mississippi and we know what a river is. We have a pretty good idea of what a river is, and we've seen other examples of what a river is, but it's a dynamic, ever-changing process. And you can come up with a definition of it, but that's different than the Buddhist idea of its essence. So anyway, Kyoko.
Kyoku. As I'm listening, I'm thinking to myself about the phenomena of birth and death. And as human beings who are Buddhists, how might it be useful to take this no fixed self into, you're really not equipped to do it at birth, but it's equally startling. You turn from basically a fish into something that breathes air, or an amphibian or something. But at death, we have, so much grief at the death of pets, other people, ourselves. So I'm just kind of curious if you have anything to say about how this understanding of no fixed self might be helpful in the understanding of death that so often is a source of grief.
Well, thank you. I'm not sure that it is. I mean, grief results from a sense of loss. And, unless you're looking at the three signs of existence, I mean, they're all together there. Everything is impermanent, and so we're going to experience loss because nothing stays. It's just the nature of our existence, that things arise and they pass away. And there are certain things that we miss terribly when they pass away. It can be a pet, it can be a loved one, it can be, some catastrophe on the other side of the planet when we still feel a sense of loss there. But I'm not sure how that would connect to not self. Just because there is no fixed self doesn't mean that there aren't selves that we're going to miss. A dynamic self. I miss them. I miss my parents. And understanding that there's a dynamic sense of self that they had at one time, or that my sense of self has changed since my parents have passed away. I don't find it very helpful. I think the impermanence in Nietzsche is probably more helpful than not self when you're doing that. And Nietzsche and then unsatisfactoriness, because things are impermanent, it's unsatisfactory, and we're just stuck in the middle of dealing with unsatisfactoriness in life, which can be huge or it can be, tiny, but it seems like it's always there. But I think, if I don't recognize the impermanence of my own self, then I'm going to increase the unsatisfactory factor in my life. So anyway,
Thank you.
here we go.
May I say something about that?
Yeah, we had some other people.
I'm sorry. Please go ahead, whoever.
Myoan, I had something, but Myoan, if it's on that same topic, she could go ahead. Mine was very brief anyway.
Thank you.
All right.
I was gonna say, well, even the Buddha felt sadness and loss when his senior students, like Shariputra, died. But I was thinking when you said that I miss my I miss my parents, like I miss my parents as well. But when I think of my parents as I get older and the conditions of my life change, my relationship to my parents, who have long ago expired a while ago, is my relationship to who my parents were and are to me has changed. So there's still some kind of dynamic relationship there of looking back at things from the past and seeing them from a different perspective based on what my life is now. And so in some way, their physical beings are gone, but there's still this a very alive relationship. And I think that's part of where, there is some kind of death, but in another sense, there isn't. And so I just wanted to say maybe that contributes to the no fixed selfness.
Thank you. Dokai, did I see your hand up before?
Well, Tim wanted to say something.
Yeah, Tim was.
Well, Tim did say something. Are you going to say something else?
Yes.
Go for it.
Just briefly, the thought occurred to me while you were talking. Two things as far as from a teaching Buddhism perspective. First is, I've always liked to say that we're not nouns, that we're verbs, but I like the word process better. And it occurred to me why the Mississippi River is a really nice example, because I think I can go up to anybody, no matter who they are, maybe even if they have negative feelings, just inclinations toward Asian Buddhist teachings, and say that the Mississippi River is a process, and they're just gonna be like, yeah, that makes sense. They're going to agree. If I say, you, John Smith, you're a process, they might like, what do you mean? But Mississippi River, it's a really nice example because I can say it's a process and I don't think anybody's going to argue.
Maybe Donald Trump.
Well, yeah, but we'll just exclude that as an example. But I think in general, anyone that's listening, you know, would relate to that and understand that. That was my only comment.
Thanks. Mary.
So a couple things. I'm a new student studying Buddhism. And so it's a very interesting talk. I really appreciated it, Carl. I always like learn something often on these Dharma talks and different ways of viewing humans. But what I always kind of come back to is maybe what Roger was pointing to, is sort of this Western science, and a kind of more concrete thing. It's called the brain, and the human reality of the brain for fight and flight. And that's something in our brain that we will always have in our earthly life. And so the fight or flight, which we feel maybe many times a day, whether it's at the stoplight or someone cutting you off, or your friend who you've known for 30 years, but now you're tiring of that same conversations, or anyway, I don't know, just millions of things. So what really struck me in what you were saying today was that we are in relationship, our reality, and that's even our fight or flight, our brain, when we're experiencing the world, is always in relationship to something else. And that relationship, that strikes me a little bit, I mean, rather than a process, and I understand that processes or the verb or the, you know, the kind of the ongoing, but the relationship, the interconnectedness, those are, I think maybe that touches my heart more. It's the interconnectedness. And then if you feel like, I mean, that's sort of the fight or flight, and then the brain saying, how am I interconnected with this situation, with this person, with this bird, with this, you know, wherever I am right now. That really speaks to me. So I appreciate that in your talk. that stuck out for me.
Okay.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, that bringing that idea, Mary, interconnectedness. When we were, so a couple things that have arisen for me in this talk is, did all of you, or did any of you read Siddhartha, you know, by Hermann Hesse? I don't remember.
Long time ago.
About the book. Yeah, I read it when I was 19. I don't think I've reread it, but in any event, I think so. And his name was Siddhartha, same name as the Buddha. And it's a fiction, of course, but he would sit by the river. That's one thing I remember, and just meditate on the river. And the only other thing I remember is he had in the book, also there was a movie, but he actually did meet the Buddha. And I think it was like, it's no big deal. You know, the Buddha tried to teach him something, but it didn't say, well, thanks, Buddha, but I think you're not getting the point. I can't remember how it worked out, but anyway, that's kind of came up for me. But then the interconnectedness too, I wanted to just say that, you know, the Buddha was very admonished his monks very directly about watching their ethical conduct. You know, that was really a big deal. And recently, I've become aware of a couple of Buddhist priests who have run into some ethical complaints. And when I hear that, it really kind of makes my guts churn. And if it would happen to us as an individual, it really gives you a sense of self. I mean, like the fight or flight. It's like, I'm gonna fight this or get out. How can I escape? But so this idea of no self, you know, you got to forget that in a certain kind, because we've got a self and we need to really watch what it does and be very careful about our actions and our speech. So that's just wanted to bring that up. Thank you.
Thanks. Aaron, I saw your hand.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I'm really glad because I raised my hand at the same time Dokai did, and I'm really glad he spoke first because I was sort of thinking along the same lines. But we've been chanting or reading the Metta Sutta in the mornings, and so I started reading up on it just a little bit, and it was kind of interesting. They make the point that it's divided, which I didn't realize, divided into these 3 sections, and kind of a traditional set of 3 sections. And the first one is the sila, or the ethical conduct, and then meditative concentration, and then wisdom at the end. And it made me think, you know, the Buddha is recommending all these ways of being, and which sounds an awful lot like, here's the ideal person, you know. I mean, it brought up to me these ideas of self. And one of the commentaries at the end brought up the idea that at the end he says, but not falling into views. And that not falling into views sort of made me feel a little better because it feels like, and I'd be interested to know kind of what people think about this, but this you know, these ways of being maybe feel like maybe a Reader's Digest version or a Cliff Notes version of, we can all agree on these things in terms of ethical conduct. Maybe we decide to act this way, but I don't want you to think, you know, at the same time, this isn't really a view. It's kind of the way I'm thinking right now, but it's something that I've been puzzling on for a long time, and I don't know if people have thoughts on that.
Well, thank you, Aaron. Views is a big subject about what does it mean not to have a view, and there is a whole section. One of the very earliest sections of the Pali Canon, according to the scholars, is the Book of Eights, and it's basically poetry, and it talks about the sage. It doesn't talk about the Buddha. It doesn't talk about Gautama. It doesn't talk about the Four Noble Truths. It talks about a sage living his life free from views, and how do you go about being free from views? We all have views, just it's what we do, it's what our brain does, it's trying to explain our experience to us. And the only thing that I've been able to take away with that is about holding views. We have the views, but how we hold those views is important. And I think there's a book by Uchiyama Roshi that's called Opening the Hand of Thought. And I thought it was one of the greatest book titles I've come across. Anyway, and so what has occurred to me is that if you hold your views tightly, it's going to cause you suffering, because the world may not agree with the view that you're holding on to. And so it's almost like you've got your hand out, but you don't even you're holding it resting. Your view is resting in your open palm. It's not, you're not grabbing onto it. You're holding it there. It's resting. You turn your hand over and it's gone. You know, it's that kind of thing. I think the views, we can hold them and we can consider them really important, but you have to hold them lightly because things change, and therefore your views may change as conditions change. So anyway, views is it's a right view. I think there is a section somewhere where the Buddha talks about what constitutes right view. And anyway, I don't have that, but yeah, views is that's a big subject there.
It's my view at this moment that it's 10:30 a.m. And so I think we're scheduled to complete our time together unless people really want to continue. But I think that it's a good time to end unless somebody has a last parting thing. Although I think what Hartman said is good. So I would like to thank you, Hartman, very much for your wonderful talk today. And next Sunday, August 1st, there is somebody who will be talking, but I searched and searched for who it is who is talking next week. And if somebody knows that, can fill it in. Hartman, do you know? Because it's not on the website, it's not anywhere. So somebody will be talking next week.
I'm sure my lovely wife has got that covered. She can't be, she's giving the talk at MZMC right now.
Oh, okay. Yes, that's what I tried to get a hold of her.
I could check with her anyway.
Yes, and so hopefully we can have it on the website in the next few days. So, but please do come because it's always wonderful for all of us to gather together. And so you can see, hopefully.
It might be me.
Oh, okay. Well,
because I keep thinking I'm giving a talk on August 1st, but I don't know if August 1st is a Sunday.
it is. It is. August 1st,
Oh.
next Sunday.
It is next
Yes.
Sunday?
Yes.
Okay, so it's me.
Okay, so it's Kyoko.
It is.
So
It is.
I think it's-
Kyoko.
Yeah,
It's
I think
on
it's on the
the sheet.
schedule. Yeah.
yes,
We
but
don't
the
have a host
schedule-
for you.
It's not. And do you know what you're going to talk about?
Yeah, what's your title, Kyoko?
My title is TBD.
Okay.
To
to-
be determined.
That's what
Okay.
mine was. That's what mine was, right?
Well, look
Wait and
forward.
see. I should reframe that. You know, it's like come and find out.
Yes,
Yeah.
with bated breath.
All right.
So the video of today's talk and the past Sunday talks are available on the website. Another way you can support Hokyoji is by connecting with our Facebook and Instagram pages. The Sunday talk and other announcements and information about the community are available there. Please like us on social media and consider sharing our content with your friends who may be interested in learning about Hokyoji and maybe even visiting. Help us spread the word about Hokyoji. And for visiting, you know, unless there's a scheduled retreat, people are always welcome to come visit Hokyoji. And if you're coming for a personal retreat or you want to come with some friends or family and do some birding or do some other things, you're welcome. But you need to call ahead of time
Thank you.
to let us know you'd be coming. And finally, as always, our generosity sustains Hokyoji's facilities and programs. We couldn't do this without you, as you all know. Please consider making a donation online. There's a donation link posted in the chat. Your gift of any amount will be a great benefit, and we are deeply grateful for your support. Thanks again. And to close, we'll chant the 4 vows together. So if the rest of you mute, I'll do some chanting here. The text is posted in the chat if you need it. Okay. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. If you'd like to unmute to say goodbye, you're welcome to. Please be well.
Thank you, Carl.
Bye, thank you.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks,
Have a
Carl.
good week.
All right.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Come see us.
There's our laughing Buddha, John Kamen.
See you.
Bye.